Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Aliyah Imbili of BS in Mathematics, Block 11. Today, I'm going to discuss the Reading in the Philippine History, Lesson 2, Identification of Historical Importance of the Text.
Learning outcomes. At the end of this discussion, you will be able to explain identification of historical significance, examine the criteria on assessing the historical significance of sources, identify the issues on assessing the historical significance. So what is historical significance? Historical significance is the process used to evaluate what was significant about selected events, people, and developments in the past. In assigning historical significance, we could choose some specific image, people, location, events, and ideas as particularly important to us. Since significance is a decision that we make, it means that different people can decide the different things that are important to them, which may or may not important to others. Therefore, significance is not the same to everyone at all times in history.
What we consider to be important can change. As a result, some event considered significant a century ago may not be important to us now. Alternatively, we may consider something historically significant today that no one cares 100 years ago. All previous statements about historical significance make it tough for us to decide what is important in history.
So how do we make choices about what is worth remembering? In order to decide why someone or something is important in history, historians use different sets of criteria to help them make judgments about significance. World War I was considered as historical significant, and to prove it, we will use the 9 criteria on assessing the historical significance of sources. World War I, also known as the Great War, began in 1914 after the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria. His murder catapulted into a war across Europe that lasted until 1918. Convinced that Austria-Hungary was readying for war, the Serbian army to mobilize and appealed to Russia for assistance. On July 28, Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia, and the tenuous peace between Europe's great powers quickly collapsed. Within a week, Russia, Belgium, France, Great Britain, and Serbia had lined up against Austria-Hungary and Germany, and World War I had begun. So how does World War I become historical significant? As what I said before, through the 8 criteria on assessing the historical significance, we will be able to identify its significance in history. So first is relevance. Is something still relevant to present life even if it had only a passing importance? Here are some ways that life today has affected by the World War I. The German, Ottoman, and Austro-Hungarian empires were dismantled. Genocide emerged as an act of war. Chemical warfare was used on the battlefield for the first time. Fascism and Bolshevism emerged as political forces in Europe. The British Empire began to unravel. Political boundaries were redrawn in the Middle East. Resonance. Who would have been affected by the event? Why was it important to them? World War I was one of the great watersheds of 20th century geopolitical history. It led to the fall of 4 great imperial dynasties in Germany, Russia, Austria-Hungary, and Turkey, resulted in the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia, and in its destabilization of European society, laid the groundwork for World War II. World War I was also important to the people at the time because of its significant impacts like huge advances in technology which will transform the way that people all around the world traveled and communicated with. Remarkable. Was the event remarked on by the people at the time or since? The American public fervently embraced the war once it was declared. There was very little dissent or misgivings. Americans around the country, including the Midwest, pitched in to support the war effort. Remembered. Was World War I important at some stage within the collective memory of a group? Every year at 11 a.m. on 11 November, 2 minutes silence is held to remember those who have died in war. That is because this is the time at which the gun fell silent at the end of World War I. Revealing. Does it reveal some other aspects of the past? 100 years after the U.S. entry into World War I, much of the logistics and strategies developed during that era still have an impact on Army operations. Resulting change. Does World War I have consequences? The First World War destroyed empires, created numerous new nation-states, encouraged independence movements in Europe's colonies, forced the United States to become a world power and led directly to Soviet communism and the rise of Hitler. Durability. How long have people's lives been affected by the war? From 1914 to 1918 and up to now, people's life was still affected by the war. They still remembering those people who died in the war by having 2 minutes silence in the month of November. Quantity. How many people's lives were affected by the war? As can be seen at this map, World War I affected people in almost every nation. Very few countries were able to remain neutral. And lastly is profundity. How deeply were people's lives affected by the war? A German general and a statesman who led the Imperial German during World War I, Paul von Hindenburg, said that, "In the account book of the Great War, the page recording the Russian losses has been ripped out. The figures are unknown. 5 million or 8, we ourselves know not. All we do know is that, at times, fighting the Russians, we had to remove the piles of enemy bodies from before our trenches, so as to get clear field of fire against new waves of assault." After years of silence of World War I, World War II followed, which Philippines have been involved. When Japan launched a surprise attack on the Philippines on December 8, 1941. Japanese provide Philippines as a base for attacks on the Dutch East Indies. After World War II, the Philippines endured crippling high interest loans under the guise United States aid, and its society and infrastructure, including more than 3/4 of its schools and universities, lays in ruins. What I am saying is that every event in the past has its own significance and why someone or something happened in the past. That's why there's historical text that gives the reader an understanding of what led up to the important events in history. Examples of historical texts are biographies, autobiographies, websites, and diary. There are a number of criteria that historians use that can be applied to establish the significance of events. Those criteria that mentioned earlier are interrelated with each other. There are also issues on assessing the historical significance. First is, our views about historical significance are often shaped by contemporary context, so that it can be dependent upon our own values, interests, and knowledge. History is written by the victor. Historical significance is how we define past events that the current writer of history deems important or relevant. Historical significance is relative and varies from location to location, generation, or sometimes to ideological orientation or political affiliation of the one doing the evaluation or assessment. All former criteria which we just learned are not fixed and change accordingly. A historical person or event can acquire significance if historians can look into larger trends and stories that reveal something important today. Both statement, "it is significant because it is in the storybook," and "it is significant because I'm interested in it," are inadequate explanation of historical significance. Historians consider knowledge of date and events primary content of history, or they call it first-order knowledge. They class historical significance as an aspect of the study of primary content, considering it secondary level or second-order knowledge. However, the way date and events have chosen and described is often named as significance without acknowledging bias. And as Winston Churchill said, history is written by the victors. And that's the end of my discussion. Thank you and have a good day.